The city always had a way of feeling too loud and too busy, but it was my refuge, a place where I could disappear into the noise. My day had been as relentless as any other, endless meetings, looming deadlines, and the dull ache of loneliness that never seemed to leave me. I was on autopilot as I trudged home, the heavy bags of groceries cutting into my palms, when I saw him. He was huddled on the corner, half hidden by shadows. His clothes were a patchwork of dirt and wear, his face obscured by a mess of tangled hair and a scruffy beard. But it was his eyes that stopped me, deep, piercing, and filled with a quiet desperation that tugged at something inside me. I hesitated, torn between the nagging voice in my head telling me to keep walking and the pull of something stronger, something that wouldn't let me just leave him there. Before I knew it, I was crouching down beside him, the cold pavement seeping through my jeans. "Hi," I said, my voice soft, almost afraid to break the fragile silence between us. "I'm Abby. Can I help you with anything?" He looked up at me, startled, as if he hadn't expected anyone to notice him. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, and I began to worry that I had overstepped, that maybe he didn't want to be bothered. But then he nodded, just slightly, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I reached into one of my bags and pulled out a blanket, one that I had impulsively bought earlier that day, not even knowing why. "Here," I offered it to him. "It's not much, but it's warm." He took it with trembling hands, his fingers brushing against mine. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice rough and barely audible. "I'm Ray." "Ray," I repeated, committing the name to memory. "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" He shook his head, his eyes avoiding mine. "No, but I'll be fine here." Something in his tone told me that fine was far from the truth, but I didn't press him. Instead, I left him with the blanket and the food I had in my bag, promising myself that I would check on him again tomorrow. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the image of Ray huddled on that corner, alone and vulnerable. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something, purpose, maybe, or connection. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Days turned into weeks, and every evening, I found myself drawn back to that corner. Ray was always there, waiting for me, though he never said so. Our conversation started off simple, how his day had been, the weather, the people who passed him by without a second glance. But gradually, they grew deeper, more personal, as if each word was a thread weaving us closer together. It wasn't until one particularly cold night, when the city lights blurred in the distance and our breaths formed clouds in the air, that Ray finally opened up about his past. "I wasn't always like this, you know," he said, his voice heavy with a mix of bitterness and regret. "I had a life, an office, a house, even a dog. But it all fell apart so quickly." I listened intently, my heart aching as he told me about the business he had built from the ground up, only to lose it all when his most trusted employees embezzled funds, leaving him bankrupt and broken. He spoke of the shame, the crushing weight of failure, and how he had drifted away from everyone he knew, too proud to ask for help and too ashamed to face them. "I don't know what I was thinking," he confessed, his voice cracking. "I thought I could start over, but I couldn't." I reached out, placing my hand on his arm, offering silent comfort. "You're not alone anymore, Ray," I said softly. "We'll figure this out together." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if trying to see past the surface, to the person who had somehow become his lifeline. "Why are you doing this, Abby? Why do you care?" I didn't have a simple answer. Maybe it was because I saw a part of myself in him, lost, searching for something to hold on to. Or maybe it was just that, in helping him, I felt like I was finally finding my own way. But whatever the reason, I knew one thing for certain: I cared, deeply, and I wasn't going to walk away. "I care because you deserve it," I said finally, my voice firm. "Everyone deserves a second chance." Ray didn't reply, but the look in his eyes told me that he understood, and that was enough for now. As the weeks passed, Ray began to change. He started looking for jobs, any jobs, and though the process was slow and often disheartening, he never gave up. I admired his resilience, his determination to rebuild his life from the ashes, and with each passing day, I found myself growing more and more attached to him. We spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing parts of ourselves that we hadn't shared with anyone else. Ray was smart, kind, and surprisingly funny, and I realized that I was looking forward to our time together more than anything else in my day. And then, one evening, as we sat on the steps of a nearby building, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Ray turned to me, his expression serious. "Abby," he began, his voice tinged with hesitation, "I need to tell you something." I felt my heart skip a beat, a mix of anticipation and dread swirling in my chest. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for whatever he was about to say. "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't expected this, not from him, not from us. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized that I felt the same way, that somewhere along the way, my compassion had turned into something much deeper. "I love you too, Ray," I whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. He smiled then, a smile that lit up his entire face, and I knew that this was real, that we were real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. But even as we made plans for the future, our future, there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was more to Ray's story than he had told me. And that nagging doubt would soon become impossible to ignore. Our wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. I had never been one for grand ceremonies, so we planned something small, intimate, a few close friends, a quiet venue, and a simple dress that made me feel beautiful without being ostentatious. But as the day approached, I began to notice the whispers. People who had once been supportive started to pull away, their voices filled with judgment and disdain. "She's marrying a homeless man," I overheard one of my old friends say, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Can you imagine? After everything she's achieved, she's throwing it all away." I tried to ignore them, to focus on what really mattered, my love for Ray and the life we were building together. But their words cut deep, and by the time the wedding day arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. The ceremony was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ray had been distant lately, and though he assured me that everything was fine, I couldn't help but feel like he was hiding something from me. And then, just as we were about to exchange our vows, Ray did something that took everyone by surprise. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small microphone, and turned to face the small gathering of guests. "I need to say something," he began, his voice steady but filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Abby, I love you more than anything in this world. But there's something you need to know before we go any further." My heart pounded in my chest, a million thoughts racing through my mind. What could he possibly have to say that couldn't wait until after the ceremony? Ray took a deep breath, then continued, "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not homeless, and I never was. I own a company, one that's still running, still successful. I've been pretending to be someone else to see if you could love me for who I am, not for what I have." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, like everything I thought I knew had been a lie. You lied to me?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Ray's eyes were filled with guilt, but also with love. "I did. But I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to be sure that this, what we have, was real." I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to feel. I was furious, heartbroken, but also relieved, in a way, that the man I loved wasn't really lost, that he had the means to build a life with me. But the betrayal, the fact that he had tested me like this, cut deep. "I need time," I said finally, tears streaming down my face. "I need to think." Ray nodded, his expression one of understanding and regret. "Take all the time you need, Abby. I'll be here, waiting for you, no matter how long it takes." And with that, I walked away from the altar, my heart heavy with the weight of the revelation, unsure of what the future would hold. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying Ray's confession over and over in my mind. I isolated myself from everyone, ignoring calls, texts, and even the knocks on my door. The apartment that had once felt like a haven now seemed suffocating, the walls closing in on me as I tried to make sense of everything. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. I loved Ray, there was no denying that. But the deceit, the way he had manipulated our relationship to test my love, left me questioning everything. Was any of it real? Or had it all been some elaborate game to him, a way to satisfy his own insecurities at the expense of my trust? The worst part was, I couldn't stop thinking about the good times, the moments when it had just been the two of us, laughing and talking late into the night. Those moments felt genuine, untainted by the lies. But now, I questioned whether they had been as real as I believed or if they had been tainted by Ray's hidden agenda. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a dim orange glow, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. My eyes were swollen from days of crying, my hair a tangled mess, but it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that made me feel like a stranger in my own skin. It was the emotional weight, the burden of trying to reconcile the love I felt with the betrayal I couldn't ignore. The knock on my door was soft, hesitant, but persistent. I didn't want to answer it, I didn't want to face anyone, least of all Ray. But something inside me, maybe a lingering trace of the love we had shared, compelled me to open the door. Ray stood there, his appearance as disheveled as mine, his eyes filled with remorse. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, waiting for me to make the first move. After what felt like an eternity, I stepped aside, letting him in. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this conversation, but I knew it was inevitable. "I've been thinking," Ray began, his voice low and pained. "About everything. About what I did to you, to us. And I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you in ways that I can't just apologize for." I crossed my arms, trying to maintain some semblance of distance, even as my heart ached to close the gap between us. "Why, Ray? Why did you feel the need to test me like that? Didn't you trust me?" Ray's shoulders sagged, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. "It wasn't about you, Abby. It was about me, my own fears, my own insecurities. I've been burned before, by people who only saw my money, my status. I wanted to know, to be sure, that you loved me for me. But I see now how selfish that was." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, determined not to let him see how much his words affected me. "You say it wasn't about me, but it feels like it was. You made me question everything, Ray, my feelings, my judgment, my self-worth. How can I trust you now?" Ray stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I don't expect you to forgive me, not right away. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Abby. More than I've ever loved anyone. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right, to earn your trust back." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the wound was still too fresh, the pain too raw. "I need time, Ray. I need to figure out who I am without you, who I am now that I know the truth." Ray nodded, his expression filled with understanding and sorrow. "I'll give you all the time you need. Just know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait for as long as it takes." He left then, and as the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of relief and heartache. I knew I needed time to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But I also knew that Ray was right. I still loved him, and that love, as complicated as it was, wasn't going away anytime soon. The days following Ray's departure were the hardest. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the noise in my head with the steady hum of productivity. But every task, every distraction, felt hollow, a temporary escape from the thoughts that haunted me whenever I was alone. I started going for long walks in the city, the same city where I had first found Ray, hoping the familiar streets and bustling crowds would bring me some clarity. But instead, I found myself drawn to the places we had shared, the corner where we met, the park where we had spent hours talking, the coffee shop where we would sit together, pretending, for a brief moment, that the world outside didn't exist. It was during one of these walks, on a crisp autumn morning, that I realized something important. I could either let this betrayal consume me, let it define my future and destroy any chance of happiness, or I could choose to confront it, to find a way to move forward, even if it meant doing so without Ray. But moving forward didn't mean pretending like nothing had happened. I needed to understand why Ray had done what he did, to come to terms with the fact that, despite everything, I still loved him. And if I could find a way to forgive him, then maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what we had lost. That evening, I called Ray. His voice on the other end of the line was tentative, as if he wasn't sure what to expect. "Abby," he said, his tone filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "Can we meet?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart racing. "I think we need to talk." Ray agreed, and we decided to meet at the park where we had spent so many afternoons together. As I made my way there, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. This conversation could go either way. It could be the beginning of our reconciliation, or it could be the final chapter in our story. When I arrived, Ray was already there, sitting on the bench where we had once laughed and shared secrets. He stood as soon as he saw me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of what was to come. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension thick between us. Finally, I spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about why you did what you did. And I want to understand, Ray, but it's hard. It's hard to reconcile the man I fell in love with the man who felt the need to test my love." Ray nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I know. And I'm so sorry, Abby. I've spent every day since our wedding wishing I could take it all back, wishing I had been honest with you from the start." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I needed to say. "I don't think I can just forget what happened, but I don't want to throw away what we have, either. I still love you, Ray, but I need to know that we can build something real, something honest, from here on out." Ray's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "I want that too, Abby. More than anything. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back, to show you that I'm the man you fell in love with, not the man who made a terrible mistake." I nodded, my heart slowly beginning to soften. "It's going to take time, Ray. And I can't promise that it will be easy. But if you're willing to put in the work, then so am I." Ray reached out, taking my hand in his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said softly. "And I'll be here, every step of the way, for as long as it takes." The process of rebuilding our relationship was slow, sometimes agonizingly so. There were days when the doubt would creep in, when I would question whether I had made the right choice in giving Ray a second chance. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when I would look at him and see the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had made a mistake but was genuinely trying to make amends. We started by being honest with each other, brutally so at times. We talked about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Ray opened up about his past, about the relationships that had left him scarred and distrustful. I shared my own fears, my own insecurities, the ones that had made me question whether I was enough for him, whether I was worthy of love. It wasn't easy. There were fights, moments of frustration when old wounds were reopened, and the pain felt as fresh as it had on our wedding day. But through it all, we kept coming back to each other, kept choosing to fight for what we had, for what we could still build together. One evening, as we sat on the couch in my apartment, Ray turned to me, his expression serious. "There's something I want to show you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn notebook and handed it to me. "What's this?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "It's my journal," Ray explained. "I've been writing in it since the day we met. Everything I felt, everything I went through during our time together, it's all in there." I opened the notebook, flipping through the pages, each one filled with Ray's handwriting. Some entries were brief, just a few lines about a particular day or moment, while others were long, detailed reflections on our relationship, his feelings, his fears. As I read, I could see the progression of his thoughts, the way he had slowly come to realize just how much he loved me, how much he had been willing to risk to test that love. "I want you to have it," Ray said, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I want you to see that, despite everything, my love for you was real. It still is." I looked up at him, my heart full. "Thank you, Ray, for sharing this with me, for being honest." Ray reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I love you, Abby. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again." Months passed, and with each day, our relationship grew stronger. The pain of Ray's deception didn't disappear overnight, but it lessened with time, replaced by a deeper understanding of each other and a renewed commitment to our future. We decided to move in together, not into Ray's luxurious home, but into a new place, a place we chose together, a fresh start that was ours and ours alone. It wasn't as grand as Ray's house, but it was cozy, filled with light and warmth, and most importantly, it felt like home. Our wedding day felt like a distant memory, a different life that we had left behind. But as we settled into our new life together, we started talking about the future, about the possibility of a second wedding, a true celebration of our love, free from the shadows of the past. One afternoon, as we sat on our porch, watching the sun set, Ray took my hand, a familiar gesture that now felt like a promise. "I want to marry you again, Abby," he said softly. This time, with nothing between us but love. Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, my heart full of love and gratitude for the journey we had taken to get here. "I'd like that, Ray. I'd like that very much." And so, we began planning our second wedding, a simple affair with only our closest friends and family. This time, there would be no secrets, no hidden agendas, just the two of us, standing together, stronger and more in love than ever. On the day of our second wedding, as I stood beside Ray, looking into his eyes, I felt a sense of peace, of certainty that I hadn't felt the first time. This was real, this was us, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as partners, as equals. As we exchanged vows, I felt a warmth spread through me, a deep, abiding love that had been tested and had come out stronger on the other side. And as Ray slipped the ring onto my finger, I knew, without a doubt, that this was the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in our lives, a chapter filled with love, trust, and the promise of forever. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.